A professor of criminal psychology is tested when an encounter with a woman leads him to killing another man in self-defense. In the 1944 Fritz Lang noir, The Woman in the Window. And that's the film we're digging into this week on Movie Bones.
You know, even if the spirit of adventure should rise up before me in Beckland, even in the form of that alluring young woman in the window next door, I'm afraid that all I do is clutch my coat a little tighter, mutter something idiotic, and run like the devil.
That was Professor Richard Wainley, I think that's how you pronounce it, played by Edward G. Robinson, who found himself in the unique position of being a college professor of what seems to be criminal psychology, who ends up killing a man in self-defense after following a femme fatale back to her apartment for a drink. Immediately after giving a lecture on the subject, actually. Also, quite ironic, don't you think? Faced with a decision to either come clean and report the incident or hide it, he wagers that the price of honesty is too high and that the two of them set about to disposing the body and all the other evidence. But his friend at the club he frequents also happens to be a cop investigating the incident. Go figure. Complications ensue. And perhaps, Ryan, that's the place I really like to start with this movie because it's the complications and how they play out as they're portrayed in the movie that kind of end up having a pretty big bearing on its success, doesn't it?
You would be correct. You would be definitely correct.
Sometimes it's like in the case of this movie, the complications seem to be like, it's the stuff that the character himself does to draw attention to himself. Just one example, for example, right? Saying he's going to be real careful about how he's going to cut, how they have to be really careful covering this stuff up. And all of a sudden, he just runs into like two different police officers, I think, at least on the way out, by my count. And
it's really three, if you think about it, because even though he's not technically a police officer, the toll man,
the toll booth, he's an official.
Yeah.
He counts as an official, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of witnesses. Suddenly people materialize out of nowhere, and the circumstances just seem to. It's like I can understand that for a certain degree in a lot of films. You'll see, there's some chink in the armor that starts to undo the plot, right? But here it seems like almost everything. It's almost comedic. Just how many of these things he's running into all at once.
You're right. It was just from the get-go, you start to see how, I want to say how things go wrong, but, he's really kind of okay up until, and folks, you can't see me doing this, but I'm putting the end in quotation marks here. But he's pretty much okay until the end of the movie. He does what he has to do. And then just like along the way, it becomes a little bit, I don't want to call it repetitive because it is a bit repetitive, but it becomes a little bit too on the nose.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like, of course you ran into this person. And of course this person wants you to do this thing. It's going to take you all the way back to the scene of crime.
Yes. That one in particular too. I remember that. Thanks for reminding me about that because when I was compiling, a list of these things in my mind of all the things, I kind of left that one off. But you're right. And in the moment I was thinking, gosh, that's an awfully specific thing to say that your patient needs as an excuse to get out. Why not tell them to go to the park and feed the ducks or something,
But you know what? It's understanding how it all ends that makes us go, okay, this makes sense. And like, that's why like certain things happen. Like, it just seems like he continuously is able to get over the hump that is in front of him, and whatnot. And we're going to talk, like I said, we'll talk about the ending here in a moment. But yeah, it's just, all of these events that take place that drive the story along, and it's just one, like, if you call it luck, it's bad luck after next bad luck, but it's always riddled with good luck.
I think the success of the ending is going to be something, it's going to be actually the part of I think we're going to have the most discussion, most things to say about. If you just look at the movie as it is, up until the end, you're going to look at it a certain way. It's like you're going to notice these things. But I don't think and when you get to the end and it finally is explained to you, I think it's going to be one of those things where it's like, does this actually hold up with this new information that you've just got? Or is it just kind of like, is it a just so ending? We're going to talk about that, but if I was to pick apart something I like the least in terms of the filmmaking aspect, I think the writing, it felt rather slow at points. It didn't feel very tight, and sometimes the scenes just kind of lingered for a while, just a little bit too long. And I don't know how else to put it that way. The performances I liked a lot, actually. Edward G. Robinson here did a pretty good job of portraying a man in his situation. He convinces you, at least from his words and actions, that you believe that. And the same thing pretty much goes for, I think her name is it's Joan Bennett, who plays Alice Reed. But my favorite character actually is one that doesn't actually enter the film until the last third of the movie. And he knows enough, or he's figured out enough, that he figures he can blackmail the two of them.
I haven't got $5,000, and there isn't any guy to get it from, so you may as well go right along to the police and tell them whatever you wish.
Now, you don't want me to do a thing like that, Miss Reed. Mr. Mazard was a very rich man, and you can't tell me you didn't get something off him. And don't forget, you'll be a lot better off dealing with me than you would with the homicide squad. You don't want to go to the chair, do you?
So, I like that character for what he is, and I like how he's portrayed I like the portrayal of the character in the film. I will say, kind of my issue with the writing is, I think there's a world in which that character is not needed, and I'm not saying that he's not 100% needed, but I'm saying he was the foil. He ultimately, that's what he's there for. We look back at the premise. This premise is about a professor of criminal psychology, who's dealing with this situation that he's suddenly thrust in. They introduce the wife, they whisk her away, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. The rest of the movie, she doesn't play a part in the rest of the movie. And I take issue with that because I think his relationship with her should have been an issue in the movie because of all the things he does. He goes off with Joan Bennett's character, Alice Reed. He knows he's not supposed to go off with her. He tells you, he lets you know the whole entire time he's not supposed to go off with her. Throughout the film, I think it would have been better if you got to watch his psyche and her psyche. About her psyche, I mean Alice Reed's psyche break down. And what I mean by that is having them mistrust each other, slowly introducing into that plot that they mistrust each other, slowly pushing them both to the brink to where we see their emotions, we see their stability, we see it all just breaking down and they're almost turning on each other. That never happens in this movie. What happens is they're just led by fear, and that's just the fear of getting caught. And really, that's it. It's just, we're afraid to get caught. And when they introduce the other guy, Height, is that how you say his name?
Height, yeah.
Height, he just becomes just the monster in the corner. That's really all he becomes. And frankly, Professor Wanley, they don't even interact with one another. I think that would have been a good thing to have that scene. But I would have liked this movie to be more about, because this guy is a professor of criminal psychology, and because this kind of paints this picture of what does it all mean to be a part of this stuff and do this stuff. I wish it would have just broken down their mentalities instead of just pushing them along in fear.
Because the premise itself is quite solid, Like you said, it's taking this guy who has this very intellectual conception of crime, right? It's his job to know X, Y, and Z in a very rather intellectual fashion, but to put him in a situation where he experiences this kind of had to kill someone in self-defense, and what does it actually do to him on the inside? Because he's only ever experienced it, as an intellectual subject, as something of a curiosity to think about. And so to break him down and to break her down too, I was anticipating, actually, based on what you said there, it's I was anticipating they were going to start mistrusting each other, that was going to play a role in it, and it never does. It kind of hinted at. It's just kind of hinted at a little bit, and then it just kind of dissipates into the nothingness. And between that and the fact that the Height character, he comes in too late to actually become a part of anything in an integral way. He's kind of in there. He does a thing that complicates things for one or two scenes. But instead of becoming, instead of further entwining that kind of braid, you really want a story's, idea and concept in a movie like this to really start to intertwine and weave, right? Where the characters change in their fortunes. There's very little of a roller coaster there. It's one up and down for that guy.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you saying, if I'm going to keep that character, I'm introducing him right away.
Yeah.
Right away. Maybe even in such a way that like he's able to mess with both of the characters without both of those characters understanding who he is, and without both those characters, like they interact with him separately, but they never interact with him together. And then he just keeps interacting throughout the film and just keeps pushing them closer and closer to the brink where they're not trusting each other. And then that's where you could take this character and have them snatch them both up. And they're like, oh, I'm afraid. What can I do? And that's where he starts to do the whole blackmail stuff.
Yes. What you ideally want to do is place your characters in this kind of a movie between a rock and a hard place.
Yes.
But this movie just has, like, the rock, and it's just kind of missing the hard place. It's not squeezing them against anything else. It's no other, and that's where he would have come in really handy, you know? And he was doing a good job. Like I said, I love the character as portrayed by him. You can see he's having fun with it. There's a certain kind of fun he has in kind of relishing his lines and kind of really sinking his teeth into this slimy guy who's got this slimy charisma going, you know?
And also, too, going back to, not this character, but also, too, with Professor Wanley, like the movie should have dangled over his head the fact that he has a wife and he's destroying his life. Because everything he did ultimately destroy his life. Or, well, you know, for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's great material. There's great material in that too. That kind of descent.
We can't afford to overlook one detail. We've got to think of everything in advance. Remember that.
I will.
Well, just because a man doesn't show up for a day, I see no reason to assume that he's been murdered.
I didn't say he was murdered.
Yes, but a trace like that on a barbed wire fence, could that be enough to be of any use?
Did I say a barbed wire fence?
Didn't you?
No.
Richard!
What?
You going to be the guide?
Oh, am I going right?
As straight as an arrow. Professor, eh? Say, you think we'd better look into this, Mr. Laylaw?
Well, that's very funny. I wasn't even thinking where I was going. I was just thinking what the inspector said.
Yes, it must have been pretty tough going.
Yes, especially at night.
Well, yes, it may have been at night.
I suppose so. But I was thinking of it as early morning, along about daylight.
Well, I thought the paper said night.
You know, friend or not, I know they're supposed to be friends, man, but friend or not, it's like at this point, after all these incidents, you'd at least be saying, I think we better bring you in just for some light questioning, just so we can rule you out. But you know what I mean? It's not like in your face. You know, as an investigator, you're looking at this like, huh.
I think an issue with it too, like that we're thinking about, like in our day and age, and I'm not saying this didn't happen back then, but it just felt so odd that he was with them on this investigation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they didn't even, again, what is he, folks? I'm asking a rhetorical question. I know what he is. He's a professor of criminal psychology. You would think that maybe they would ask him questions, and maybe what his questions would do would be to lead them away from the whole issue.
Yeah.
You know, like try to paint the picture of someone else. And I think that's another failing in the movie is that he's a professor of criminal psychology, and that's it. I mean, that pushes us into the story in its own way, but it could have been so much more of the story.
It doesn't use the characteristics that you know are part of his specific character, something that makes him indistinct from anyone else, his knowledge, his understanding of this, and then to add the layer of temptation to it, because he's under that kind of pressure, to the temptation to use your knowledge to get you out of a spot, because you have the ability to perhaps throw a little bit better, misdirection than your average person would. But he just kind of like falls into this, I'm guilty. Now I'm going to, because I'm guilty and I'm feeling it in my conscience, I'm going to incriminate myself by getting ahead of the investigators with knowledge that only the criminal would have.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens so many times, it became kind of funny, and when you string it together like that, it becomes obvious. But even when you're watching it the first time, you still start picking up the pattern. You know what I mean? It was driving me nuts.
I don't want to feel like I'm complaining about the movie, because actually there's certain things I like about it a whole lot, but it's one of those movies again, and we've seen this, I feel like we've seen this a number of times, that it could have done so much more with its material than it did do with its material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't want to sound like it sounds like I'm going to be really harsh with this. It's going to be on the lower end of the scale, but I'm not going to say I regret watching it. We'll get to that in the reviews, but I'm not quite as down on it as that. There, like I said, there's good things here I really enjoyed. But should we get to the ending now? That's the thing. Should we get to the ending?
We should talk about the ending, because the ending will make you feel some type of way.
Maybe it's just because I live in Kansas now, but I couldn't help but thinking of, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. And it's like, yeah, they did the Dorothy, wake up, practically thing where he's...
Yeah, that's the thing. And then, like, he goes around. I thought the same exact thing. Like, that was my first thought. I was like, this was absolutely ripped from The Wizard of Oz. So he thinks the jig is up. He thinks that there's no way they're going to get out of this, that the dude, the blackmailer, Height, Wanley thinks, okay, well, he's won. There's no way out of this. And the only way out that he sees is suicide, which for film noir, that's not a bad way to, end a movie. I know that sounds wrong, but I mean, it's film noir. And again, I'll talk more about film noir in my review and everything. For film noir, it's not a bad way to end something. His head slumps over, and then it stays right there for a moment. I actually thought, okay, this is where the movie's going to end. But no, then it's like, you get this like dream sequence type of camera. I cannot describe this. It's just that blurriness around the face. And then all of a sudden someone's waking him up. And my first thought was like, oh, maybe he just fell asleep. No, someone's waking him up, and you learn that he's been in that chair that he fell asleep in the bar at the beginning of the movie. It's 10:30 now, so super late at night. But, he's woken up. And then he goes around, he sees the people that were he sees the guy that he killed, and he sees the guy, the Height guy. And, he's like the doorman at the hotel. He's like the doorman at the place, One's a doorman, the other one's a bartender. It's like, he's like, oh, it's you, it's really you. And they're confused. But they're rightly put off by that. It's like, dude, you're a weirdo. It's so Wizard of Oz coded. And I say that because I'm fairly certain. I haven't found it yet, but I'm fairly certain they had to use that.
The reason why it works better in The Wizard of Oz is because in The Wizard of Oz, you see the before, it's a true bookend. Okay? Yeah. Because in the beginning of the movie, in Wizard of Oz, you've got Dorothy and her family in the farm, and the farm workers, and the people who would end up being her companions in Oz, and her nemesis too, they're all seen as their normal real-life selves first. Because when you go to Oz, you understand the audience has an implicit contract here. You understand that these are representations that she's seeing, in this world. It's a direct connection there. It's because of the fantastic setting that it gets away with it. If you don't have that fantastic setting, you just kind of elide but remove one of the bookends at the same time. Because this movie, you do not see these men, or these people, these characters, in the beginning. You don't see them, except for, I guess, unless you count the painting of the woman in the window herself. But it's like, so it just tries to elide all that. It just kind of to glide right over that omission. Yeah. I mean, there are subtle hints in there. They do try to give subtle hints in the writing. I went back and looked at the beginning again. But it's like, it just doesn't feel, it's like they're trying to do something different with the same idea, but it's not different enough. And it doesn't really work either.
Do you feel like the ending, like the very last little scene, is a bit too comedic?
You mean, we're talking about where he sees everyone as the real version?
Like that, the part where, he goes back to that picture, because that picture's real.
Oh, yeah. And
I know what you're talking about woman comes up. That felt just too comedic for me. I was like, this movie is a serious movie. It takes itself seriously. No matter how the issues we have with the writing and everything, it does not kid around. It takes itself incredibly seriously throughout the whole movie. And that just felt so comedic. Like, he even runs off and everything. It's a lighthearted. It just felt like yeah, exactly.
Lighthearted bit of humor at the end of a noir film. I mean, could someone potentially do a film that combined, that kind of level of comedy with the noir? Maybe, possibly. I don't know. I'm not going to say it can't be done. Maybe a really creative and talented person could do it, but you don't just throw that in at the end. It's like you have to mix it in all throughout so people know the tone that you're supposed to be. You need to know, audiences need to know the tone that you're supposed to be enjoying this film in. You know, and you don't throw that in at the end and say, oh, you know what, folks, forget all that. We're going to leave you on a note of high hilarity. And I'm like, oh, come on. Point blank, if you were to make this film again today, would you just ditch the dream sequence and stick to the kind of the intriguing concept of like what we talked about before with the, you know, criminal psychologist being the subject of his own study kind of a thing? Or do you keep the dream stuff and try to make it work in the way we were talking about more recently here?
It's noir, and there's supposed to be a bleak outlook on everything, and she's the, you know, and her character is very much the femme fatale archetype. I don't think I keep the dream sequence, because I think that it's probably better to not have the dream sequence. I think it's better for him to, you know, collapse in on himself. And if we're not going to have him, we at least destroy, gosh, this sounds wrong. We at least destroy his life. We destroy aspects of his life. At least maybe his wife finds out.
Maybe he can't get everything back that he thought he'd lose. Maybe he just can't get it all back, you know? There's be dark.
This movie, Nightmare Alley. This is the newer version, stars Bradley Cooper and Rooney Mara. I love that film. It has its own problems, but I do love that film. You know, it's about this guy working in a, like this traveling circus / freak show kind of thing. In carnivals, you know, they have this reputation for shifty characters. And again, freak show type stuff. And this guy, you know, he starts out as just a guy. As he gets involved, he becomes a little bit more corrupt. And ultimately, by the end of it, he's still alive. He becomes a character that he meets at the very beginning of the film who is, quote unquote, you know, one of the freaks. But this is a guy who was down on his luck and was forced to play the role of a man wolf or a man beast in a carnival and was wound up being treated like a beast and everything. Yeah, and so, like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, you know, he keeps his life. Bradley Cooper's character keeps his life, but he's destroyed. I mean, like, you're looking at it, he's a shell of himself, and he's being treated like an animal in a cage.
Wow.
Literally treated like an animal in a cage. Films like that and this work best when you destroy the person. And I know this sounds so wrong. He jumped into this world, and essentially what we're given is it's a get out of jail free card because he's just dreaming.
Yeah, that's all it is. And so it kind of fails on that note.
Yeah, that's my thing would have been just destroy his life, but make him still alive. That'd have been a beautiful ending.
That's me too. And that's where I'm at too. For ratings, I'm going to go with bad dates on this one. It has, like I said, it's got its charms in certain places. Like I like Haight's character for when he finally showed up. You know, I like the effort the actors were giving. There's stuff in there, you know, that you can enjoy. But for me, it's all undermined by that, you know, by the problems with the plot and the story. Just the direction it took and that very rather cheap ending. So I'm not going to watch this again. This is a bad dates for me all the way.
Okay, so I do have my issues with this movie, but I'm going to go one step up, and there's a reason, because it is film noir, and I love it. And if you're a fan of film noir, I do think this is one of those movies that belongs in a museum, and the reason why is this. The term film noir originated as a genre description in part because of The Woman in the Window. This pushes along the noir hero concept, and it also pushes along the femme fatale concept. I think it belongs in a museum. I'd come back and watch it every now and then if I really wanted, like if I'm on a noir kick. Obviously, there are better movies. But I think it belongs in a museum just because it's one of those first movies that introduces this genre that's bleak, it's crime-driven, it's ego-driven, and I just love that too much. Like, I love it personally too much. I do give it a belongs in a museum.
Okay,
but if I didn't,
fair point.
I will say, if I did not love that genre, I might actually say Bad Dates as well. But the genre itself and just the fact that it's one of the earlier ones and the acting is good, I'm going to give it a belongs in a museum rating.
Okay, cool. Well, that's fair enough, man. Fair enough. I mean, there are plenty of people out there who enjoy this genre, you know, to the depth. I think where your review's probably spot on for them. Now's the time, folks, when we like to remind the listening audience out there that if you're having fun watching these movies alongside us, and we are having fun doing it, we're getting a lot out of it. And we hope you are too. And if you like hearing our reactions, please do like, subscribe, comment, and of course, follow us on your podcast purveyor of choice. Tell us if you think we got it all wrong. Maybe nominate some films you'd like to see us do, especially if they're available for free, because this adventure comes with no strings attached, guaranteed. And on that note, Ryan, what movie are we all watching next week for next week's assignment?
First off, this feels like maybe another noir type movie. Could be wrong. But it's a heist film where ex-lovers recruit a team and conspire to steal an emerald-encrusted dagger from the namesake palace in the film's title that I am going to try my best to pronounce. Topkapi?
That's as best as I can get to. And maybe they'll say it in the film. If they say it in the film, it'll help a lot. But it stars Maximilian Schell, who I really like as an actor. I've seen him in a few things. Also really like Peter Ustinov, who's in this as well. I've never heard of Melina Mercouri, I think is her name.
Yeah.
But it's directed by Jules Dassin, and it's made in the 60s, I think. It's a 60s film.
Well, I am imagining, do you know if this is like a more serious movie or more of a comedy movie?
I have not a clue on that front. I have not a clue yet.
I'm interested in this. This seems like a very interesting.
This would be, I think, our first really true heist film, I think.
Yeah, hopefully it is a true heist film.
I hope so. I mean, yeah. But we're going to find out soon enough. So, well, I guess that's about all we can say for this week, folks. We'll see you guys next week. And Ryan, I guess I'll see you next week, too.
Yes,
bye-bye,
sir.
folks.
Thanks for the dime. I find it.